Hi, Laura. Thanks very much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
All right. So, what does reaching your full potential mean to you?
Okay. So I think for everybody it's different because it depends on the dreams and the aspirations that you have. I'm very much about not having any kind of limitations to what you can achieve. And I think for me, reaching your full potential is having the clarity around where you're going and removing the limiting beliefs that might hold you back. And then knowing that the sky's the limit, kind of whatever it is that you want to achieve, as long as you're prepared to put in the effort and have the commitment towards achieving it. But I think the big thing about achieving your potential is that it should be continuous improvement. So many times people kind of aim for one thing, and then I'm all for a period of reflection on the journey you've taken. But if you're going to continue to achieve and really hit your potential, then um, there shouldn't be there shouldn't be any kind of limitations that sit with that.
I love that. What is a business coach and a leadership coach?
Okay, so I have worked for various organizations and seen different cultures all the way through. And as will anybody have, there are good examples of that and there are challenging examples of that. We've probably all worked in places that have been a little bit challenging. I first and foremost went into leadership coaching because having been a CEO at the age of 32, I think I was, I found it quite lonely. And it was a completely different set of behaviors than I'd had to kind of embrace before. A lot was around managing my own mindset to be in that leadership role. And so, after kind of struggling with imposter syndrome and trying to kind of make sense of it, that was where I made the decision to first and foremost go on a journey of healing for myself and fully understanding the skills that I would have needed and would have benefited me more in that role. And then, having gone through that journey of healing, making a commitment to not wanting to see anybody else struggle in a leadership role. So that's kind of where the leadership coaching element came from. And that is about working one to one with people to identify where are the challenges that they're finding in becoming the leader that they want and deserve to be. And then through a series of different coaching practices, helping them to overcome those barriers to kind of unlock things.
Mm.
The business coaching bit comes in a bit wider than that when you start to look beyond the person who sat in the top chair to the leadership team, the organizational behaviors, the culture of a place, and then some of the governance and strategy stuff that sits in behind that as well.
I don't think being a leader comes naturally to everybody, does it? Um, do you think being a good leader needs to be learned? Do you think some people are naturally a better leader than others?
I think it's a mixture of both. I think some people are born with some really clear skills around leadership. And in fact, the way that most of the rest of us do leadership now is modeled on the behaviors that those great instinctive leaders have shown us in the past. But for a lot of people, you do have to learn the behaviors, and there's an element of being psychologically safe in your role, and we don't often learn these behaviors as we're growing up, and unless we've got really good examples of people who demonstrate those behaviors around us. So I do think that a lot of us have to learn those skills.
Yeah, I think having a sporting background for myself has definitely helped me um, in I can't say for business because I don't have a staff team or anything like that. But in terms of being led, I feel like I'm very good playing rugby for a long time. Being able to listen to someone, being coachable, but also to be a leader as well. And in rugby, you've got players that are good at being led, and you've got players that are the leaders, the ones that are calling the shots, the ones that are tapping you on the back, the ones that are saying, good job. Um, are there any traits that you see in people that make somebody an exceptional leader besides just an average leader?
Yeah, I think authenticity is probably one of the first ones that come up for me, and an understanding of what your values are and a clarity of self. so many times. Uh, I've done it in the past and I've seen other people do it as well, and still see other people do it, where they take the seat at the table, but they're not bringing the authentic version of themselves. They're still being the person that they think that they're expected to be, or the person that they feel like they need to be in that particular room, or society has shaped them to be. There's a journey that we all have to go on of learning who we authentically are. And then there's a consistency in how we show up. So I think those natural leaders have that kind of really congruent sense of self. And I think that's the quality that kind of sets people apart.
How important do you think making first impressions are?
I think I think they are important. We very quickly, our brains form a decision about the information that we receive. So there's a process that happens with any interaction that we have where information comes in at us. Our brain has to very quickly make a decision about whether we're okay or not. And that then forms the chemicals that our body produces and the way that we interact with people. Now, that's happening like every second with a huge amount of information. So the way that we present ourselves to others means that we're forming that very first opinion, that very first version that somebody else gets of us. And then once that's implanted in somebody's head and we've made assumptions about it, about that person, it can be quite hard to unpick that sometimes. So I think they are very important, which is why I do so much work with people about self-awareness and understanding how you show up in a room. Because once you come in as something, it can be hard to backtrack and become something else.
I think it's definitely possible, but it's definitely hard as well because we've all probably got people in our lives where you are now really great friends with that person or you get on with them really well, but you say, when I first met you, I just thought you were a bit of a
Yeah.
whatever. Um, so we know that those first impressions, if they haven't been great, can be undone. But I think it's a bit of an uphill battle. And obviously, if you leave good first impressions from the off, then you're probably onto a winner. Um, how can you stand out as a new business if you haven't got any social proof, or if you're not creating a new business, being a new leader? If you haven't got the social proof or you haven't done a job like that before, how can you make sure that someone's going to take you seriously?
So I think there's a couple of different ways of being able to get some of that social proof, and it doesn't necessarily just need to be the thing that you're doing right now. We've got to look at transferable skills and where you bring other things in from. So if you're looking to become a leader, you can begin to take a more active role in your community, for example. So it's not just an organizational leader. You could be somebody who takes on additional responsibilities at a community group or joins a board of trustees to learn a bit more about leadership, and support the third sector. There are so many different ways that you can engage, and particularly, leadership and thought leadership, as it sometimes is about presence and visibility. I've been there. The business has just turned 5 years old, but when I was brand new in business, I didn't have the social proof to tell people. I actually did some free work for a while for people to just kind of, can I do this for you in return for a testimonial,
Yeah.
to help me first and foremost beta test all of my programs and my approaches and make sure that it was all getting the results that I wanted it to, and also to then get those testimonials that helped other people to understand what they would get through those coaching programs.
I've seen you do a lot of work and you stand up for women in business. And I've done a little bit of research and I've seen that there's still in large corporations a massive gender inequality in the workplace. Um, in Walmart, similar roles between men and women, men have been paid a lot higher. Goldman Sachs is a very male dominated, um, in terms of leadership roles. you've got McDonald's, and of course, the one that everyone knows about is Hollywood. You know, most of the biggest movies are scripted and produced by men. How are you, or what are you doing to try and challenge the status quo and get more women involved in business and leadership?
It's so frustrating that we're still having this conversation
Mhm.
after so many years of talking about change and equality, um, and there's only so much that I can do. Um, Sponsoring local events, being part of the movement, being part of the conversation, challenging behaviors when I see them come up, which I think is really important because you have to talk about it in order for people to understand and make change, but not just talk about it. You have to help organizations see it and understand the impact of it and the impact of doing something differently, which is massively important. There are organizations I work with who have had a real change in the last particularly 6 months around their approaches. And so in some organizations, I work with them and run women's networks that's about encouraging women to have the confidence to go for roles that are particularly seen as male roles within the workplace. But I think as well, because I long for the time when we have the generation that comes up without the preconceived notions that there should be any difference or there still exists a difference. And, that's not just gender equality, that's all different kinds of equality. Um, and my small step approach is be part of the movement as much as I can. Give women in the workplace the tools to be able to step into their most confident selves and then present themselves appropriately, teaching them how to challenge behaviors for themselves, because it can't just be somebody like me who does it. Every woman for themselves needs to be able to call out the poor behavior when they see it and have an appropriate mechanism and support to be able to deal with it. So it goes beyond just sponsoring an event or running one coaching session. There's a kind of ethos that runs through everything. And I'm just about to launch, might already be out by the time the podcast comes out, but it's really exciting. I'm running a sponsorship program where organizations can buy in for their corporate social responsibility. But it's been started by somebody in business who wants to support women in male-dominated industries to access coaching. So this person is funding the coaching sessions, which I'll be delivering to people. The person would like to remain anonymous, which is why I keep kind of holding myself back from divulging a name or a gender. But it's fantastic that there are now other people who are beginning to see the value in unlocking the potential of people and bringing them on.
Do you think men and women should be managed differently?
No. Everybody is unique, right? So the way that I would have a conversation with you over a challenge would be based on the way that I was reading your body language, the kind of language that I was hearing from you, all those kind of things. And every conversation I have with every client is different. Every conversation I've ever had with an employee is slightly different based on the needs of them in any given moment. Excuse me. The fundamentals of how we engage with the workforce, yes, there should be some sensitivity around the way that we communicate with everybody, depending on where they're coming from, because we don't want to make anybody feel uncomfortable. But actually, for me, it's about creating the culture in an organization that embraces those different things. I don't feel like we should be having different conversations with men and women based on their potential for maternal leanings or kind of a softer skill set potentially, because actually we have plenty of men who have those instincts and who lean into the softer skills. And we have a lot of women who demonstrate some behaviors that are not maternal and that can be quite um, different to what you would expect. I think it's the expectation of how you think somebody will
Yeah.
behave that's the most damaging thing. So I think for me, I don't feel like the practices and processes should be different for genders, but I do think there are some very specific support differences. So, for example, menopause at work right now is a huge conversation. It's something that affects every single woman, and it's something that men may well very struggle to understand.
Yeah.
So, when you're having conversations about how the changes in practices and support that you need to give in a workplace to support somebody who's menopausal, well, that's probably not support that you need to offer to all of your workforce, because if you're 50% of your workforce aren't going to experience those symptoms. But a woman who is menopausal or wants to have a child should never be deterred from taking an opportunity because of those things. There are so many support mechanisms that we can give. I'm dyslexic, and as a kid, really struggled to kind of figure things out. Once I was properly diagnosed, the amount of tech and support that's in place now to support me has never stopped me from doing anything. It's just about having the conversations and not being afraid to have the conversations and checking out with people if they're okay. Because if we're going to change the way we communicate, it might be slightly uncomfortable for some, but we can just ask that question. Let's have more grown-up conversations at work. Well, everywhere, actually.
I think it can be quite hard for a man maybe to have those more difficult conversations with a woman because they're worried about hurting their feelings or how it might make them look. So that's why I asked the question, and that would have probably been a better way to ask the question.
Okay.
Um, I mean, we've all got, sometimes if I'm in the car and I've got a little bit of road rage, if it's a man that I've got the road rage at, I don't feel very bad. But if it's a woman or if it's an old lady, I think to myself, "Oh, I'm not going to beep the horn because it's an old lady or it's a lady in the car." And that's why I asked the question. It's kind of those. Um, it kind of leads on to what I'm thinking about in terms of in the workplace or when people come to you. Do you get people to take personality tests or do the Myers Briggs or to do the? I think someone called Jim Quick did a where you do a little quiz and it tells you which animal you are and it tells you what personality type you are. Do you get people to do those?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes depending on the circumstances, I think it can be really helpful to understand your preferences.
Yeah.
And because I'm slightly cautious with labels. Okay. So
Yeah.
when we do quizzes and it says you are this type, you may have a preference towards that type, but actually you're also capable of other things. Just because you've demonstrated a particular behavior doesn't mean that up until now, doesn't mean that you can't change it and do something different moving forwards. And I think this is where labels can be quite challenging because we don't want to pigeonhole people and say, this is what you are. Well, you've done the quiz and now we know that you're this. So I think sometimes they can be really, really helpful. And so it just depends on the person that I'm working with. You mentioned then about the road rage issue. And I think that takes us into the kind of territory of unconscious bias. Kind of we don't like to think that we have biases against one group of people or another, and whether that's a positive bias or a negative bias, regardless, when we treat people differently, we are leaning into those, women are the weaker sex, or they need to be protected or mollycoddled, or men are strong, men are the providers for the family, men don't cry. These are the kind of things that really challenge us as a society now, because we know that all that stuff's not true. And we have to be really mindful of our own behavior And I talk about this all the time with people. It's not about other people's behavior, it's about yours. So it's knowing your behavior, knowing what your biases are, knowing what your preferences are, and then working hard to make sure that you don't do something that causes somebody else to be on the poor receiving end of that unconscious bias.
I know. I think it comes down to I was listening to a Chris Williamson podcast, which I found really interesting. And this is the last thing we'll talk about the men versus women stuff. Um, but he was saying it's now becoming toxic masculinity for men to, for example, hold the door open for a lady because the lady is going, "Oh, why are you holding the door open for me? I'm a strong, independent woman." Whereas the man is not thinking that you need the door held open for you. We're going back thousands and thousands and thousands of years, and to have somebody try to undo their nature, that is, for some men, that is just them. It's, we're trying to undo something that very well might not be able to be undone, because if we go back thousands of years, men were the providers, men were the go-getters. Now I'm 100% all for, I mean, we need to be moving into the direction where we're going to gender equality. I think the workplace should be whoever can do the job the best should get the role, regardless of color, sex,
Agreed.
whatever it might be. Um, but also, to be a gentleman is something that I think if we were to say that men shouldn't hold the door open for a lady because we're unsure of what that lady might think, or we're worried about hurting that lady's feelings because they can open the door themselves, do you not think that could lead us down an even worse spiral?
I think in that instance, I don't view that as holding the door open for a woman because she's less capable. If a man came in behind you, would you drop the door in his face?
No, absolutely not.
So for me, this is about manners and about courtesy towards other people. I think there's a difference.
Mm.
And I actually think it's sad that we do come across that now where we are, I say we, I'm not speaking on behalf of all of my gender. I wouldn't dare to do so. But as a society, when I see, and I saw a video actually of something happening like this, where somebody was very cross about the door being held open for them going in by a gentleman, and I will use that term because I think it's only right and fair when somebody shows manners and courtesy to somebody else. I think that's important, and actually, I think that's a huge part of what's missing in our society at the minute, in my opinion, is that consideration and care for other people. It's not about holding a door open for somebody, is not about gender equality. It's about kindness. And we could all benefit from a lot more kindness and consideration. I think we're in this society now where there's so much legislation and fear around doing the wrong thing, and people who take the brand of feminism and turn it into a me against you. And I think there's just a more considerate approach that we could all be having for each other.
It's really interesting because a lot of women can feel, for example, this is what Chris Williamson was talking about. It's the differences in trying to understand the other gender, because a man might be in the gym and might be looking at a girl and might think, "Oh, that girl's really attractive." That's his thought process. He's not staring. He's not being weird. He's just looked at the girl and thought she's attractive.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the woman over this side is typically going, "Oh, look at this weirdo. He's just looked at me," and So is this maybe just the culture and the media and what we've been going through over the last however many years that's making the girls feel unsafe? Whereas the majority of men are just looking at the girl going, "She's attractive." Whereas the woman might be going, "Oh, this is making me feel really uncomfortable." So they've both got the right intentions. They're not meaning to whatever, but because they haven't actually had the communication and spoke to each other, one's making the other feel uncomfortable.
Yeah. I think you hit the nail on the head there, which is about the communication element of it.
Yeah.
Could you imagine a world where we were all just honest about the way that we felt and the expectations that we had of other people? I think the first thing to point out is that we can never mind read what somebody else is thinking. So we can make assumptions
Yeah.
about, well, that girl stood there and she's thinking, oh, he's looking at me and I feel unsafe. She might not be thinking that, I think is kind of, and also he might not be looking at her and
He might
just
not be.
thinking,
Exactly.
or he might be looking at her and saying, that's a really great technique she's got. So again, we can't
Hmm.
make assumptions about why people are doing things, but we can hope for a world where people have the conversation about it and say, could I ask you not to look at me because it's making me feel really self-conscious?
Yeah.
And the guy would probably go, I'm so sorry. I was just looking at your technique and I was thinking if you moved your elbows more or,
Yeah.
whatever. I'm not a gym rat. I don't know these
Yeah.
things. But I think though, if we were in a society where we communicated and we gave feedback more readily in a constructive and a supportive way, holding the door, screaming at somebody because they hold the door open for you is doing nothing in terms of moving things forward.
Hmm.
There's clearly something that's triggered that person to give that response, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's about his behavior for opening the door. It could be something that's going on for her. And I think instead of judging each other, if we made the time and the effort to understand where the other person's coming from,
Yeah.
we have much more meaningful conversations. There doesn't need to be so much conflict all the time.
Yeah. So you've led me into communication, which I think is where communication can resolve a lot of these issues that we've just spoke about. But what role does emotional intelligence play in leadership? Probably comes down to communication as well, but
Yeah, it's huge.
yeah.
It's huge. Emotional intelligence should be part of the conversation that we're all having and something that we all have an awareness of. So leadership or not, it's so important and it's a big piece that's missing. We're not taught this stuff as we grow up. I'm desperate to find a way to teach kids how to learn these skills. In a leadership role, there's the responsibility not only for your own behavior, but creating an environment for other people to be able to thrive in. I think that's the big difference and the kind of the big responsibility that comes with leadership. Having an awareness of your levels for your own emotional intelligence, first and foremost, is important because you've got to be able to set a good example by the way that you behave. So many times, I mean, I've worked with so many leaders and continue to come across them all the time who do one thing and say another. Nobody's expected to pick up emails at 9 o'clock at night, but they're the ones firing them out. They take their laptop on holiday. They can't take steps away from things. They don't trust other people. They're all signs of imposter syndrome. It's signs that they do not feel psychological safety in the space that they're in. So first and foremost, if that's the example that people are getting from leadership, kind of what hope do they have in terms of finding themselves in that culture? And they will then not feel psychologically safe there either. Then they have to have an awareness of being able to read the room. So it's really important to understand the principles of how you build rapport. How do you relate to people? How do you notice when the mood is changing? What do you see? Where might you want to be more considerate about it? And ultimately, it's about knowing that you don't have to have all the answers, but being comfortable enough to go and get help when you need it.
I wish my partner was sitting right next to me here listening to all this. This could help
Why?
us. This could help us.
Do you know, it's this stuff doesn't just apply to work.
Yeah.
It's relationships, it's your
Exactly.
friendships, it's all this kind of thing. And this enhancing your potential, it doesn't just happen at work, it happens across your life. And once you begin to make changes in one space, this is the thing I love. I did some coaching for somebody who was in a workplace recently, and I met her husband afterwards. And the first thing he said to me was, I've got my wife back. Thanks very much. Now, we hadn't gone into the coaching with the intention of doing personal and we didn't
Yeah.
talk about those things. But when you begin to have an awareness of your behavior and you enhance your own skill set, and your emotional intelligence for yourself comes into play, and then you begin to understand how your behavior pulls out behavior from other people,
Mm.
it's just game changing across all elements of your life.
Do you think it's a good idea for partners to work together, or do you see that it doesn't work more than it does work?
I've had relationships where I've worked with my partner. I've had relationships where I've not worked with my partner. Um, and I think
It's a lot of time spent together, isn't it?
it is a lot of time spent together. I think it depends on the relationship. Again, it depends on the kind of communication that you have. I'm not advocating for one way or the other,
Mm.
by the way. I think that it's up to the people involved to be able to manage that effectively. I think where you probably get challenges, as with any relationship, is where you have a direct line management situation, because if there is poor performance to address, that can be really uncomfortable. And you have to think as a couple about whether you're prepared to deal with those issues together, or whether it would be more comfortable to not have to deal with those issues. But that's for every couple to have that open conversation and figure out for themselves.
What about um, a boss and their employees? Should they be friendly with them outside of work? Is it a case by case basis? Should they be just employees? Um, yeah, let me pass that over.
Healthy boundaries. I talk about boundaries all the time. And this doesn't even just go between bosses and employees, or employees and employees, people at work and clients. Some people do really, really sensitive work with people. And it's really important to have those boundaries so that if you bump into somebody in Asda or Tesco's, or other supermarkets are available, that you can, that there's a healthy boundary there, and that you don't get, 20 minutes of your Saturday morning suddenly doing an impromptu kind of counseling session or something with somebody in a supermarket.
Mhm.
I think you have to be comfortable with the boundaries that you're setting. And again, every individual has to work those out for themselves. I've definitely had some situations in the past where I've realized my boundaries have been unhealthy, and I've then worked hard to kind of rectify that.
Possibly too friendly with them, or you're spending time with them outside of work in a
Yeah,
friend capacity instead of a
I think,
job capacity.
yeah, I've done that. I've been the other way where I've disengaged too much because I've had my fingers burnt from being too engaged, and then I've tried a different approach. I think the thing is not being afraid to try something different. Just because something has happened for you one way in the past doesn't mean that you can't change behaviors. The more authentically you understand yourself, the more you'll know where the line is. And if you don't know where the line is, then you don't have clear boundaries. And that's a worry, because if you don't know your clear boundaries at work, you probably don't know them in your relationship, and you probably don't know them in your friendships.
Okay, so how do we go about setting those boundaries?
So I think for me, I work a lot with people on this, because sometimes our boundaries that we set link into our limiting beliefs that we hold about ourselves as well. They can be quite kind of intertwined. For me, the process starts with understanding you as you authentically are. So, what kind of values do you hold? Who are you? What's your identity? What's your belief system? What are the really fundamental things that underpin you as a person? And then you can begin to build up all the other things around that that make you you. I work a lot actually with people who experience empty nest syndrome. So they get to the point where the children have left home and suddenly they don't know who their identity is outside of being a parent, or people who are new into retirement or a career change. Who am I at the core of it?
Having a purpose.
Having a purpose is really important. And it's one of the reasons that there are lots of studies across the world now around, they call them blue zones, places, kind of concentrations of areas across the planet where people live to be over 100. And one of the key things they reckon makes them live so long is having purpose. It's really important for us to identify what our purpose is and what we need to be doing on a day-to-day
Yeah.
basis. But I think you have to be clear of those things, and then you have to be aware enough that when somebody crosses your boundary, that you feel it and that you notice it, and that you then can be prepared to address it and challenge somebody on the fact that they've crossed your boundaries.
What do we do in the workplace where we go into work and there's that colleague that we just do not like? How can we tackle that?
Ooh, that's a big question, because there are so many variables to that. Do you not like them because of something they've done? Do you not like them because there's a preconceived notion that you've got of them? Sometimes if somebody's behavior is really toxic towards us, it would only be natural that we would move away from that. So I think just saying, just be nice to them probably isn't that helpful. I think the first thing is to fully understand the reasons for that, and if that's a them behavior or if that's a you behavior. And when I say is that a you behavior, I mean, sometimes we behave in a certain way that triggers a response from other people, and we have to take responsibility for that. So it might actually be that you don't like that person at work because you went in one morning and had a rant about something and they disagreed with you. So you kind of have to fully understand kind of the circumstances that sit behind it.
So, in terms of how we can place different employees, if someone's not getting on with someone, should the boss be thinking, right, we should keep these separate? Or should the boss be thinking we should put them together more so that they can start to get on?
So I think that you would first and foremost make sure that anything you do is in line with your employment practices and your policies and that kind of thing. But mediation can really help with this kind of thing sometimes, because if we don't know where the other person is coming from, sometimes we have these like cross transactions with people and we don't really understand why. So mediation is a great way. But also individual support for those, that those conversations of, well, what is it about them? And with somebody who can fully understand what the person is saying and knows how to dig into those questions, I think is really important.
Something that I seen on your LinkedIn was that you guide professionals through the constraints of imposter syndrome and limiting beliefs through neuro linguistic programming.
Yeah.
For someone that doesn't know what all that means, especially the neuro linguistic programming, if people are listening and they don't know, can you just elaborate on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Neurolinguistic programming is the kind of psychological science between, so neuro is the brain, linguistic is the use of language, and then programming obviously is the programs, the behaviors, the patterns that we have that develop. We kind of have two elements to our brain. We have the conscious and the unconscious part. The unconscious bit is the bit that's in charge of most of the functions and our pre-programmed elements that form us up. So, for example, have you ever driven home and you kind of pull up on the driveway and you think, I don't remember how I got here. I don't remember the journey. So probably you were completely safe the whole time, but your unconscious brain is so used to that program of taking you home that it can just kind of take over and do it. Meanwhile, the thinking part of your brain is thinking about dinner or the shopping list or what needs to happen or becoming a new father or whatever, all those different things that is going on. Our brain can kind of do these different things. So understanding the programs that we already have, understanding which ones serve us fine. So, for example, the one that drives you home nice and safely is perfect. We don't want to tamper with that. But then understanding the ones that don't serve us well. So the ones that hold us back, the ones that give us the imposter syndrome, the limiting beliefs, all the things that stop us from enhancing our potential, right? That's the stuff that holds us back. So the way that I work with people is through understanding what programs exist there and then reprogramming to insert a new belief system, which then enables you to be able to move past those and begin to try on new types of behavior and then adapt and change and bend and flex accordingly. The most frustrating thing that I ever hear from somebody is, it's just the way I am. And I always say, no, it's just the way you've learned to be
Yeah.
up until now, but things can kind of change moving forward.
That leads me on to something that I've only just recently started practicing. And at the start, you think this just doesn't work. But like you said, it's about reprogramming the mind. And there's two examples that I can come up with, and that would be mindfulness, something that I used to think was a load of rubbish. Um, but the more you practice it, the better you get. But also gratitude.
Mhm.
Um, how do you practice gratitude?
So, in a couple of different ways, I make sure I take time every day to be grateful. Um, I express gratitude through prayer. I spend time at the end of the day with my son talking through what we're both grateful for. So, we kind of do it as a family exercise. Um, and but you can do it in all kinds of ways. You can do it verbally, you can do it in your own head, you can write it down. Some people journal. There's lots of different ways that you can express gratitude, but just, and it doesn't have to be a huge practice. It just has to be, build it into a routine you've already got. While you're stood waiting for the kettle to boil, or while you're brushing your teeth, just list 3, 5, 10 things that you're grateful for. And it doesn't even matter if every day for the first bit it's kind of repetitive, it's the same stuff, but it helps to frame your brain in a much more positive way. And actually, what you tell your brain you're looking for is the things that will
Yeah.
find you. So if you're looking for things to be grateful for because you know you're going to be making a list every day, or you're looking for opportunities to be mindful, or whatever it might be, it's much better to train your brain to be on the path for looking for those things rather than train it to be on the things for, today's going to be miserable, or today's going to be a challenge, or I know work's going to be awful.
Yeah, the mindset behind that is super important, and I've spoke about this on a previous podcast, but it takes a long time to work on your mindset. It takes a long time to feel grateful if you're typically haven't practiced gratitude before. A good example for me would be um, now if well, I've never been so much like this, but a lot of people are. But a good example would be that when somebody sees another person driving a nice car, your first reaction, or a lot of people's first reaction, is what a expletive, whatever you want to use,
Mhm.
that's your first reaction. Or they go on 3 holidays a year, or they haven't worked hard for it, they're just whatever, there's a lot of bitterness. And when you can change the mindset from, oh, I'm jealous or envious of what they've got, to that inspires me, I would like to get that, I can have that if I was to work hard, if do you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it's really difficult to, it's really difficult to have that mindset. But over the last 4 or 5 years, it's much easier. There's a lot less anxiety. You feel a lot more grateful when you can just will others to win in the pursuit of you trying to win as well.
Yeah. I think the science behind that is that we our energy goes where our awareness goes. So the more that you look at and focus on the positive spin on things, and this really comes down to challenging your own behavior. When you see yourself or when you catch yourself having these negative thoughts, is to challenge yourself. Well, actually, how could I make this a positive for me? And reframing that
Mm,
to, okay, well, this isn't, I'm not angry at you because I'm jealous at you. I'm inspired by you,
mhm.
and then lead that into action, I think, is the big thing. So let that drive you into improvement, into accelerating your own journey so that you're driven, more driven
Mhm.
even, to get where you want to go.
Yeah, I think we should spend more time looking at the people that have been successful, and ask, how can I get there, rather than they must have done something dodgy to get there, which is often
Yeah.
one's first response. And for someone like me who's right at the very start of business, less than, well, like a year in, um, I am looking for people that's the reason of this podcast, right? The idea is to get around people that have been there and that are a few steps ahead of me, to try and take something from it rather than just saying, oh, well, I can't do it because. So yeah, I think that's really interesting. A couple more points. Something that I've seen that's really interested me and I'd like to know more about is the Lego method. For people that don't know what it is, me included, what is the Lego method?
So it's Lego Serious Play, and it's a way of being able to bring fun and um, a different way of expressing yourself and expressing your ideas in kind of any situation, really. It's really versatile. So, for example, I did a workshop last week on organizational culture, and we used Lego as part of that, where we were building models around what good culture and what poor culture looks like. It's interesting because we express ourselves so differently through play, and I use play quite a lot in the work that I do with people. So be that through drawing, you don't have to have a fine arts degree to do it. Stickmen and stuff is absolutely fine. I'm certainly no drawer myself. But when we use Lego, we think about, what does the brick mean? Is there a purpose for the shape of the brick? Is there a purpose for the way that it's interacting with the next brick? And so what we're not building is houses or preconceived structures. Sometimes the things are completely weird and wonderful little models that come out. But actually then, as the person expresses to whoever else is in the room, well, this bit means this and this bit means this. And it's always a really encouraging and thought-provoking process. And then what's really interesting is if people are building individual models around, let's say, good culture, or you might be building your department's part of the strategic plan using Lego. And then we kind of work out, well, what are the bits that are needed to begin to interconnect them and what do they mean? Not everybody can sit and write a document. Not everybody will sit and read a document, but it's about creating something that's memorable that helps people to be really part of that process. So you can express it yourself in a different way, but then also you have these fantastic photographs of the models that you've built, which actually helps your brain to conjure the association better with the feelings that you put into that or what you were seeing and hearing at the same time. So it's a much better way of creating links in the process, and much quicker, because our brain can work so much more quickly in that way.
There's some really interesting studies around childlike play and how that can really speed up the learning process. And I think as we get older, we forget how to play like a child. And that joy that fills a child up when they've just finished a jigsaw or when they've just built something with Lego, we can still achieve that as adults. I mean, I did a jigsaw recently where I finished it and I was like, oh my God, that was amazing.
Yeah.
But we stop doing that when we get older. And I think when we stop doing stuff like that, our creativeness slows down. And it's kind of what you don't use, you forget. So I think that was really interesting when I seen that you use the Lego
Serious Play.
Lego Serious Play. I think that was really cool. Last thing that I want to finish on is your 30 life lessons by 30.
Oh, yes.
40 life lessons by
Yeah,
40.
Yeah.
So I wrote down 4 that I really liked, and I thought you could expand on each of them.
Okay.
Embrace change.
Yeah. Change can be really fearful for a lot of people. And for me, it has been at different stages of my life. I've gone through periods of real extreme change. And there's a process of letting go what has been and coming to peace with what has been and the fact that things need to change. But if you think about change in life as a pool of water, if there's no change of water that happens in there, it becomes stagnant and then the things that are in it kind of die off. There needs to be this constant flow through to keep things fresh and healthy. And yes, change can be scary. And even if you embrace change, it can be scary. But looking for the positives in things, we talked before about kind of reframing the way you look at something. This is it. You know, if you can look for what might be the opportunities that come out of this for me, and they might be very unexpected, but if you're looking for the opportunities, you'll find them. If you're looking for the threats, you'll find them.
If there's somebody listening to this thinking, oh, I just would love to start my own business, but I don't know what it would be, and I'm working in retail and I'm doing 9 to 5, and the money's not amazing, but the money's good. Like I'm getting by. That would be embracing change for them to go, right, do you know what? I'm just going to make the leap and I'm going to start my own business. How can someone do that effectively, especially if they don't know what business they'd like to start?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, there's a stage of understanding what you're good at, kind of where's my skill set, what have I got to offer? And so, whether that's cooking or sewing or sales or marketing or coaching or whatever it is, what are the things that I'm good at? How could I turn that into an opportunity? What steps would I need to go through to get there? And what would I need to be confident enough in myself to be able to deliver that to others? And the one thing I would say is, I think there's that little voice in everybody's head that says unhelpful things like, why would somebody come to you?
Yeah.
Or why would your product be good enough? Work to really push past that, because that part of you is actually designed to keep you safe. It comes from your fight or flight response.
Mhm.
If you can learn to kind of create a healthy boundary around that, you can begin to push through that and then kind of see. But, change doesn't have to happen overnight. Change can be delicate and considered and gentle. When I first started my business, I still had a job
Mhm.
somewhere. I kind of built things up until the point where I was ready to make a thoughtful transition through. So, you don't have to make radical change to be making change. It's about momentum. Every small step is something in the right direction. So even if it's just that you ring fence one night of the week to list all the stuff that you're good at, and then another night to think, well, what might be the business opportunities out of those things? And a key element in all of this as well is don't forget the joy. Not only what am I good at, let me try that again. Not only what am I good at, but what do I enjoy? What brings me pleasure? Because you know that saying, if you do something you love, you never work a day in your life. Try and lean into elements that bring you joy as well, because you'll be much more motivated to achieve those things.
Education matters.
Okay. Education matters is not about the qualification that you have. For some people, the school system that we have just isn't supportive in the right ways. And for all different kinds of reasons, we all have an element of the way that our neuroprogramming is different. So this isn't about having the rubber stamp or you have to have a degree to be somebody. I don't believe in that. In some cases, yes, you may need those qualifications, but education in terms of awareness of self and embracing every opportunity. When I was in employment, if the opportunity to go on a course came up, like I was the first person with my hand in the air, even if I didn't see how it related to my job as it was,
Yeah.
and I've done all kinds of weird and wonderful training, some of which I've used and some of which I haven't, but it's helped me to learn more. I listen to a lot of podcasts now. That's education for me now, is I'm learning new things. I'm learning about new theories. I'm broadening my horizons. I'm widening my viewpoint so that I'm not so fixed on things. What that does do, the important thing about that is being able to have a conversation in a room with lots of different people. So the more you educate yourself about what's going on in the world, about life, about different theories, the more you begin to understand what you love and what you don't love, and the more meaningful communication you can have with others.
It's funny because that education matters and embrace change kind of links into each other as well, because as you continue to educate you can also change your opinions on a lot of things as well.
Absolutely.
Um, and that's something that's happened to me a lot recently. I thought one thing, I continued to educate myself around that, and then I changed my opinion. Um, so yeah, set boundaries. I know you touched on that, but you seem to be passionate about that one. So if you want to,
Yeah, I'm really passionate about boundaries, and I think that comes from experience of not being very good at setting boundaries, and then coming to a place in my life where I'm very clear on my boundaries and I'm very clear on what I call my non-negotiables. So there are certain things that are really uncomfortable for me and sit in conflict with my values, and I'm not prepared to compromise on those things because I feel like those are the things that make me authentically me.
Mhm.
So I think we a lot a lot of the challenges that we face, particularly when we're talking about interactions with other people, come down to boundaries and knowing when it's okay to say no and knowing when to push back in a considered way. And you can still do all these things in a very delicate and sensitive way, but learning how to be authentically true to
Mhm.
yourself.
I've spoke about this before as well, but I find it, I mean, it just sends shivers up my spine and even thought of doing it. But how many things do we do on a daily basis, and how many lies do we tell on a daily basis, just because we don't want to hurt someone's feelings? For example, um, you get invited to a dinner or a party and you just really don't want to go. Instead of saying to that person, I don't want to go, you'll say, I can't go because, and then insert the excuse. And the challenge that was laid out was for a full week, you can either just go and do all the things, or you just have to say no and the real reason behind why you're saying no. And I thought that was really interesting. But I mean, we do it every day subconsciously. We make up excuses and tell the other person why we're not going to do something just because we're worried about their response, or because we might come across as a bad person, or
Yeah.
as, selfish, or whatever that reason might be. But saying no is a really difficult thing for people to say. I've had it with this podcast even. I'll ask people if they'd like to come on, and they'll make up an excuse, or they'll say, "Oh, maybe in April, or maybe in July," and they try to give me a load of reasons behind why, but they're probably just they don't want to come on. But how hard is that for them to say? Um,
We're not trained to say no very well, and this does absolutely link back into the boundaries conversation. We don't learn how to say no. But what's really interesting is that um, what we talked about there was the ability to say no to other people well, but quite often we don't even say no to ourselves
mm,
well. So we don't even have those boundaries around ourselves. Um, I've been like this in the past with my cell phone. Like, do I want my mobile to be the thing that dictates everything in my life? My mobile phone doesn't come up to my bedroom anymore.
mhm.
That I've kind of had to set these boundaries because I didn't trust my own behaviors. I found it too much of a temptation. So I'd wake up in the morning and I'd be instantly on emails, which was toxic for me. And I recognized that.
Out of sight, out of mind, isn't it?
Yeah. So I have to make a choice in that instance. It's like, there are kind of three stages. There's an awareness, so we have to spot the behavior, and then we get to make a choice,
Mhm.
right? And the choice is I'm going to continue to ignore it and do what I've always done, or my choice is okay, I want to do something different. And then the third step is action. Okay, well, what am I going to do that's different this time? So that's the process always around setting boundaries. Am I okay with this? And with any kind of behavior that we want to
Mm.
instill, am I okay with this? What's the awareness that I need to be taking from? And then the big thing is the decision. Am I going to continue to allow people to treat me that way? Am I going to continue to put myself in that position? Am I going to continue to be spoken to, whatever? Yes, because I can't be bothered to do anything about it. And you know what? If that's your choice, that's fine. That's okay. but it's your choice, and there's power in ownership.
Yeah.
So when you recognize that actually I'm choosing to allow people to treat me this way is also really empowering, because guess what? It means you can choose to do something different as well. It's all your choice.
Quality over quantity.
Yeah. It doesn't really matter what you have. Some things are, let me start that again. It's not necessarily about how much of something you have. It's about the quality of it. And you have the responsibility to set the parameters about what good looks like for things. So it's not about having the most expensive car. It's about what you do with that car and the quality that you get out of it. It's not about how much money you have in the bank necessarily. It's about what you do with the resources that you've got and what joy that brings you.
It's all good having all the money in the bank, but if you don't get a couple of days a week to spend it with your family, then what good is it?
Yeah. And that's the thing. I think quite often we get on this hamster wheel of I'm chasing the thing, success, wealth, happiness. But we rarely stop and say, well, what does that actually mean? How do I know when I've got there? How do I know when I've got wealth? How do I know when I'm happy? How do I know when I'm successful? And it's one of the first coaching kind of questions I ask people is, what is it you're looking for? And because, when I look at those things, all the things that I want, when I quantify them and I say, okay, well, what is I'm looking for happy, for example. What does good look like? Well, sometimes I get to go, actually, I'm already there. And therefore, I'm not chasing anything new. We've got to learn when to step off the hamster wheel and just enjoy it for a minute. Because so often we're chasing the next thing that we forget the joyful element of living. And, life is a gift, and we have to take our own responsibility to use it in the way that is meaningful for us. No one else can choose what meaningful is like for you. You have to set that. And if what you then decide is that you need 2 days at home with your family, well, then that's what you should be striving for. How do I create a life that gives me that flow, that gives me that balance that I'm looking for? And then that's what you go after.
I think that is a perfect place to leave it. Thanks for coming on, Laura. You've been a great guest. If people want to find you and connect with you, where can they go?
You can find me on LinkedIn, on Instagram, and on Facebook, and on the website, which is www.lauracadmanlimited.com.
Thanks all for watching. If you did enjoy the show, please give us a like and subscribe. It really helps us improve the show week after week and get more great guests like Laura on. I'll see you in the next one.